I hope everyone has had their coffee, and please do your best and get as much as you can get over the next 2 days. Invite your colleagues. Just make the best of this opportunity. And now it is my distinct privilege to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Jacqueline Corrigan-Curay, JD and MD. Dr. Corrigan-Curay is the Principal Deputy Center Director in FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, CDER, and most recently she served as the Acting Center Deputy Director for Operations, directing center and agency-level priority and initiative programs, and leading GDUFA III reauthorization negotiations. Previously, Dr. Corrigan-Curay was Director of CDER's Office of Medical Policy, OMP, where she led the development, coordination, and implementation of medical policy programs and strategic initiatives. She worked collaboratively with other CDER program areas, FDA centers, and stakeholders on enhancing policies to improve drug development and regulatory review processes. Please help me to welcome Dr. Corrigan-Curay. Thank you.
Good morning, and it's such a pleasure to be here to open the Generic Drug Forum 2023 and to celebrate the 10 years of the forum. At today's forum, celebrating 10 years of the Generic Drug Forum, you're going to hear from experts across the generic drug program who will provide insight and updates on topics such as the pre-ANDA program, generic drug metrics, post-market safety, pre-approval inspections, and global generic drug affairs. Ensuring that patients have greater access to safe and effective and affordable quality generic medications is a public health priority for FDA. Creating more competition by increasing the availability of generic drugs helps reduce the cost of treatment and increases access to health care for more patients. And the statistics really bear that out. Generic drugs play a critical and ever-increasing role in the health of American people. For example, if you look at 2021, 91% of all prescriptions filled were generics. That's really an incredible statistic, and yet they account for only 18.2% of spending on drugs. Indeed, it's estimated that more than $1 billion a day in savings comes from generic drugs. I'd like to take this time to recognize just how far we've come in the last 10 years of this Generic Drug Forum. The Generic Drug Forum was born 1 year after GDUFA and has grown with the program. The theme of the first SBIA Generic Drug Forum was GDUFA and You, when industry was eager to learn more about the newly signed GDUFA legislation. In the 10 years since that first conference, the generic drug program has grown exponentially. For example, in 2013, FDA approved or tentatively approved 535 generic drug applications. Last year, FDA approved or tentatively approved more than 900 applications. And for every drug that we approve, there are a number of post-approval supplements, manufacturing, labeling, that we also need to address. To get to that number of approvals means that we need to be continually responsive and provide regulatory advice on individual applications and provide general education through forums like this. For example, controlled correspondence is one way that we commit to providing this regulatory advice. And if you look at the growth in 2013, there were 953 controlled correspondence controls submitted by industry. But by 2022, we are up to 3,732. So certainly there has been continued growth. And that has really led to some of the successes that we've seen in GDUFA II. In the complex generics program, we've really strengthened that pipeline by implementing a pre-ANDA program which supports applicants even before they submit their application. Their applications are informed by product-specific guidances in this area that often require us to invest in our GDUFA science and research program. And then, of course, providing those regulatory advice through controlled correspondence. Overall, in GDUFA II, we approved close to 5,000 new drug applications, including 490 first generics, so really providing that first competition, as well as 553 complex generics. And this was all done during a time, at least part of GDUFA II, when we were responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, if 91% of our prescriptions are generic, as you can imagine, generic drugs played a critical role in the COVID pandemic for patients who were in hospitals and acute care settings, and as a result, we needed to approve more than 1,700 COVID-related approval actions and 100 plus original ANDAs. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the GDUFA Science and Research Program because it's really important to understand that GDUFA is not just about application review, but includes these commitments that provide support to applicants before they submit their applications. It really does help us strengthen and diversify the pipeline of generic drug applications, including, of course, for complex generic drugs. Complex generics and complex drug device combinations are just an increasingly important part of therapies that patients rely upon. So we need this research program to generate practical science that drives development and approvals. It supports the investigation of generic development challenges and helps us establish and clarify the scientific framework for ANDA development, submission, and assessments. Next month, we'll be hosting our annual GDUFA Science and Research Initiatives public workshop on May 11th and 12th, and we hope to see you there. You can be assured that complex generics and the research program will continue to be a priority for GDUFA III, and indeed, we committed to new timelines around product-specific guidances for complex products. Now, in addition to clarifying the scientific framework, another way we're enhancing the assessment process is to continue to provide transparency in our regulatory expectations. GDUFA guidances clarify FDA's regulatory and scientific expectations, and therefore we can then enhance the overall quality of ANDAs submitted to the agency for approval. In addition, we publish maps. These maps are designed to enhance the speed and predictability of the generic drug review process. So let's talk now a little bit about GDUFA III and where we want to go. In GDUFA III, in addition to focusing on complex generics, we want to maximize the efficiency and utility of each assessment cycle, with the intent to reduce the number of assessment cycles for ANDA and facilitate timely access to quality, affordable, safe, and effective generic drugs. So how will we do that? So how will we implement this? So to reduce the number of review cycles, we need to, at times, extend the review cycle so we can resolve an issue. That may be using imminent approval, where we might extend it for 60 days for a very minor administrative issue, or it may be a longer goal date extension as appropriate, for example, for labeling, or a scientific issue that comes up and a sponsor asks for a more comprehensive scientific discussion mid-cycle. We're also facilitating the pre-submission facility correspondence pathway so that it aligns more with business practices. And of course, expanding opportunities for advice is key to keeping applicants on track for approval. That includes expanding options for advice from after a complete response letter by adding to the scope of controlled correspondence. We also are adding post-CRL scientific meetings in certain cases, and opportunities to communicate when changes in a product-specific guidance impacts an ongoing bioequivalence study. There are also additional opportunities to resolve active pharmaceutical ingredient-related issues earlier in the review cycle, to provide assistance to manufacturers in resolving manufacturing quality issues that prevent new generic drugs from being approved. And we're revitalizing the suitability petition to facilitate the development of new ANDAs for a different route of administration, strength, or dosage form than the innovator drug. Alignment on expectations is really the key to success, and we encourage applicants to really learn about those opportunities in GDUFA, such as the GDUFA III meetings, and use them. We have revamped the pre-submission meetings so that these meetings provide an opportunity for you to introduce the FDA review team to unique or novel data that you plan to include in your submission. As I mentioned, at times we change our PSG guidances, and we've established teleconferences that can help clarify what to do if a PSG change impacts your ANDA development program. And then the new post-CRL scientific meetings can provide input on new studies before you make a submission in response to a complete response letter, so to make sure that you're on the right track. We have a lot to do in GDUFA III, but we negotiated with industry that there will be a sound financial foundation to support the program. We have new resources for staff to meet the growth and new commitments. And we've also agreed to implement a capacity planning adjuster, which is already in effect in PDUFA and BsUFA. And this will enable us to tap into new resources if the program grows. Now, we've already been quite busy with GDUFA III. We've issued 12 guidances and 79 product-specific guidances. For example, in February, we published the first draft guidance describing the process for the new GDUFA III PSG. We also published 2 draft guidances within days of GDUFA reauthorization, which address issues with facilities and drug master files that can impact application assessment and approval. The other thing that has changed since COVID, of course, is inspections. Well, much of the work that the GDUFA program did could be transitioned to home. Certainly inspections was not one of them. Well, we're very happy that we were able to resume domestic inspections in October 2021 and international inspections in March of 2022. One of the ways we were able to carry on in COVID successfully was by leveraging a variety of tools for facility assessment, including remote assessments and MRAs. And we know that there will be a role for these tools as we continue to move forward. As we return and do inspections, we certainly continue to realize that to build resiliency and prevent shortages requires quality manufacturing. Prior to COVID-19, the majority of shortages were due to manufacturing issues. And we continue to see problems at facilities, many of which manufacture older sterile injectables used for acute ICU care, oncology, parental nutrition, and ophthalmic drugs. And so the question for, I think, us and you is, how do we do better? One of the things that we'll continue to do is to try and encourage innovation in manufacturing that supports quality. For example, we have our emerging technology program to support innovation in advanced manufacturing. We want to emphasize that advanced manufacturing is not just for innovator companies. Multiple developers of generics have engaged with CDER's emerging technology program. However, we also want to note that the generic drug company is not required to implement advanced manufacturing because the innovator drug has decided to do so. We understand the value of generics and look forward to understanding how to better support quality manufacturing to avoid shortages that can be so devastating to patients. Because really, we are in this together. So when you ask us why we collaborate beyond our borders to safeguard our patients, it's because we are patients and parents who need medicines for sons and daughters. When you ask us why we want to make sure that the generic drug and the brand drug work the same, it's because we will be using those same medications as you. And we realize that it's not only important to have those cost savings, but to have the confidence that it will work the same. So when you ask us why we monitor the safety of generic drugs for as long as they are in the market, it's because when we reach into our medicine cabinet, we want to know that they're safe medicines. We are patients too. So I want to thank you for your attention. I'm really excited to hand it over to our speakers, and it should be an exciting and informative day.
Thank you, Dr. Corrigan-Curay. This is Ray Ford with SBIA, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our keynote addresses. First, we welcome from OGD, the 2023 Outlook and Opportunities, Dr. Lylan Murphy. Dr. Murphy is the Deputy Director for Clinical and Regulatory Affairs in OGD since January 2020. Dr. Murphy began her career at FDA in 2007, joining CDER's Office of New Drugs, Division of Gastroenterology and Inborn Errors of Metabolism Products as a medical officer. In 2011, Dr. Murphy transitioned to the newly developed Center for Tobacco Products, serving in various leadership roles within the Office of Science until she returned to CDER in 2020. And from the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, we have the 2023 Outlook and Opportunities by Dr. Larry Lee. Dr. Lee is the Deputy Super Office Director of Science in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. He directs the activities of staff members and OPQ sub-offices responsible for the quality assessment of regulatory submissions in the Office of Biotechnology Products, the Office of Life Cycle Products, Office of New Drug Products, and the Office of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing and Assessment. He represents OPQ in programs and activities that impact quality assessments by coordinating with OPQ, CDER, and ORA. He also serves as the point person for the pharmaceutical industry and scientific and academic groups in developing programs to support science and risk-based application assessment and approval. Please join me to welcome our keynote presentations by Dr. Murphy and Dr. Lee.
Good morning. On behalf of the entire Office of Generic Drugs, I would like to welcome everyone to the 2023 Generic Drugs Forum. Following is a brief outline of my talk today. I'll highlight accomplishments as described in our 2022 annual report, then talk about GDUFA III enhancements, and finish with our global engagements. OGD plays a critical role in protecting and promoting public health. Our vision is that we are the world leader in the science and regulation of generic drugs, serving an essential role in advancing FDA's public health mission. Our mission is to ensure high-quality, more affordable generic drugs are available to the American public. OGD priorities have been to strengthen and support our workforce, fulfill our program commitments, enhance our regulatory processes, and promote stakeholder understanding of and engagement in our assessment, as well as science and research activities. I've heard previously how generic drugs account for a vast majority of prescriptions dispensed, but make up less than 20% of total drug costs, making them a vital part of the U.S. healthcare system. As you can imagine, when a new generic drug is introduced to the market, this generally helps to improve supply and reduce costs of that drug product for consumers. To help illustrate the outsized impact of first generic approvals compared to other generic approvals on driving savings, consider pregabalin capsules used to treat nerve pain, where there was a 95% price reduction during the first year of generic drug sales, saving billions of dollars for the U.S. public. As published in the recent 2022 OGD annual report, we had a very productive year with work on the congressional reauthorization of user fee legislation. Hundreds of generic drug approvals were made, including complex generics. We advanced research, and then we continued to work on international collaborations, to name a number of our efforts. In addition to preparing for GDUFA III implementation, the Generic Drug Program approved or tentatively approved more than 914 abbreviated new drug applications in 2022, including 107 first generics. Some of these first generic drug examples include the first generic for pemetrexed for injection, where 14 generics referencing Alimta were approved on the same day for treating non-squamous, non-small cell lung cancer and mesothelioma. The first generics for bortezomib for injection, where 8 generics referencing Velcade were approved on the same day for treating multiple myeloma and mantle cell lymphoma. There were several GDUFA III accomplishments also in calendar year 2022, where 4 draft guidances, 6 final guidances, 3 external maps, and 1 Federal Register notice were published. In addition, there were notable generic drug program outreach opportunities through webinars, workshops, and other industry meetings. I'll talk more on PSGs in the next slide. To date, FDA has published more than 2,000 product-specific guidances, known as PSGs for short, which can be found on FDA's website at Product-Specific Guidances for Generic Drug Development. PSGs reflect agency's current thinking on the most appropriate methodology for developing drugs and generating evidence needed to support a specific generic drug approval. These PSGs give applicants better opportunities to efficiently develop generic drug products and to prepare more complete and more accurate ANDA packages. In 2022, we issued 257 PSGs in continued support of these efforts. Later this morning, there is a session dedicated to providing an overview of the FDA PSG program under GDUFA III. We also worked to advance scientific research in 2022 through the GDUFA Science and Research Program. This program helps to ensure regulatory standards, recommendations, and decisions are based on the most current scientific evidence. In 2022, there was approximately $20 million in generic drug science and research programs awarded to facilitate generic drug development and evaluation. Comes from GDUFA-funded research can expand FDA's understanding of generic drugs, including complex generics, and can help develop advanced methods to characterize product quality and performance. These methods may play a critical role in determining how the FDA evaluates the quality and bioequivalence of complex generic products and can establish the scientific basis for novel and more efficient generic drug development pathways. For example, the 2022 approval of the first generic cyclosporine ophthalmic emulsion referencing Restasis was helped over multiple years by GDUFA science and research that advanced an efficient demonstration of bioequivalence for complex generic drugs, including a series of research projects related to cyclosporine ophthalmic emulsion. The GDUFA-supported research addressed challenging product characterization issues, developed analytical measurement and statistical analysis tools, and supported updates to generic product development recommendations in product-specific guidances leading to the approval of this first generic product. Here, I'd like to present another example where GDUFA Science and Research Program supported development of a PSG. Peptide and oligonucleotide-based drugs are emerging therapies that present unique challenges for generic drug development. FDA published a PSG for a nusinersen sodium intrathecal solution to treat patients with spinal muscular atrophy. This was the first PSG for this class of oligonucleotide drugs, and it provided recommendations on assessing pharmaceutical equivalence and bioequivalence for this complex product. GDUFA research was essential to the development of this PSG. Additional PSGs published recently were made possible by the science and research addressing major public health challenges. In fiscal year 2022, FDA published 2 PSGs for an exenatide subcutaneous suspension, which recommended, for the first time, 2 in vivo pharmacokinetic bioequivalence study options for a medication to treat diabetes. These results of GDUFA-funded research provided information to address challenging public product development issues related to the detection limit of a bioanalytical method, data variability, study duration, or sample size. On July 9, 2012, GDUFA was first signed into law and was designed to speed the delivery of safe and effective generic drugs to the public and improve on the predictability of the review process. 10 years since implementation, just last October, we launched into the 3rd iteration of GDUFA, as it is authorized every 5 years. I'll now discuss why we are excited to launch into the GDUFA III program. GDUFA III further enhances applicants' ability to develop more complete submissions. This program allows for appropriate resourcing to meet current and future workload demands, And GDUFA III enables continued maturing of the regulatory pathway for complex generics, as well as continued enhancement of user fee resource management. Based on lessons learned from transitioning previously from GDUFA I into GDUFA II, the generic drug program staff have spent a considerable amount of time over the past year preparing for GDUFA III. This preparation enabled the program to be well positioned to be at a running start on October 1st of last year, and already by the end of 2022, we made strong progress. At the start of GDUFA III, there are several changes to the generic drug program's activities metrics report. The monthly and quarterly generics metric pages have been merged onto one page. The report will be updated once a month, and the monthly report was previously updated twice a month, and metrics have been added or removed from the report based on the reporting requirements in the GDUFA III commitment letter. You can learn more about GDUFA III metrics this afternoon. This slide lists the many GDUFA III guidances and maps that have been published as of early March this year. As you can see, we have been busy updating existing documents and developing new policies and procedures as appropriate to be in line with the new GDUFA III commitments. Here we highlight a specific guidance which was published just in February of this year. In GDUFA III, FDA agreed to certain timeframes and procedures for scheduling and conducting 1. PSG teleconferences to provide feedback on the potential impact of a new or revised PSG on the applicant's development program, and 2. Pre-submission PSG meetings and post-submission PSG meetings to provide a forum in which the applicant can discuss the scientific rationale for an approach other than the one recommended in the PSG to ensure that the applicant's proposed approach complies with the relevant statutes and regulations. The new draft guidance describes recommendation on requesting these types of meetings and procedures to promote well-managed meetings. We encourage generic drug industry stakeholders to take advantage of these new opportunities to meet with FDA, as these PSG meetings allow applicants to receive feedback on the potential impact of new or revised PSG on their development program. Speaking of meetings, this slide lists new GDUFA III meetings and processes created to enhance FDA and stakeholder interactions. The new meetings introduced in GDUFA III are the post-CRL scientific meetings, the enhanced mid-cycle review meetings, and product-specific guidance meetings. Beginning in March 27th of this year, the FDA generic drug program resumed in-person face-to-face meetings with industry in a phased approach, in addition to meetings by video conference. Initially, the in-person face-to-face meeting option will only be available for two meeting types, which are the pre-ANDA product development meeting and the pre-submission meeting, for which the applicant requests the in-person face-to-face meeting format. This in-person face-to-face meeting format will be hybrid, consisting of core representatives from both the FDA and the industry, where they meet in the FDA campus, while other members join via video conference. The video conference only option is available as well. GDUFA III enhancements were developed with the goal of improving first generic and subsequent approvals, and for those applicants with a missed goal date, we have not forgotten about you. GDUFA III has a number of meaningful interactions available after the first cycle intended to increase chances for subsequent approval. One of the ways OGD supports generic drug regulatory activities is through international engagements. We have staff working on OGD's international activities in collaboration with other FDA centers and offices to advance the mission of developing generic drugs. As an example, the FDA-led forum, the Generic Drug Cluster, was established in 2021 for the world's leading regulatory agencies to address generic drug development internationally. In this past year, we've added a new regulatory agency to our roster, Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration. This makes a total of 7 regulatory agencies participating in the cluster. Examples include Health Canada and the EMA, The generic drug clusters aims to increase scientific alignment among leading generic drug regulatory agencies, thereby leading to more efficient generic drug development. Later this afternoon, there will be a presentation dedicated to discussing more about our international engagements. The Generic Drug Global Affairs activities encompass harmonization on scientific and technical recommendations for generic drugs under FDA's international harmonization initiatives, regulatory strengthening and reliance, partnerships and information sharing, and setting international standards. Recent collaborations include development of a new guidance. This new guidance M13A provides recommendations to ANDA applicants for conducting bioequivalence studies during both development and post-approval phases for orally administered immediate-release solid oral dosage forms designed to deliver drugs to the systemic circulation, such as tablets, capsules, and granules or powders for oral suspension. This slide summarizes a number of information-packed upcoming events to facilitate generic drug development efforts. We look forward to seeing you at any one of these events we are working hard to prepare to support generic drug development. In closing, I wanted to share with you a testimonial from an OGD staff member on why it is important and meaningful to work as a member of the generic drug program. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you enjoy attending the 2023 Generic Drug Forum.
Hello everyone, I'm Larry Lee, the Deputy Director of Science in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. Today I'm going to discuss our perspective on the future of pharmaceutical quality through innovation. Everyone deserves confidence in their next dose of medicine. This is why pharmaceutical quality is important, because it assures the availability, safety, and efficacy of every dose. I will discuss three important topics today. First, how we have used innovations to handle assessments throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact of the tools we have applied. Next, I will talk about our Quality Management Maturity, or QMM program. Then I will share important initiatives related to advanced manufacturing. If you read our latest report on the state of pharmaceutical quality, you have seen that CDER's site catalog has around 7,000 drug manufacturing sites across the world. Our growing product catalog has around 170,000 drugs and 19,000 active pharmaceutical ingredients. Our catalog includes products of all human drug user fee programs, new drugs and biologics, generics, biosimilars, and over-the-counter drugs and compounded drug products. Given our extensive site catalog, we have to be innovative quickly. During the height of COVID-19, travel restrictions challenge our facility assessments, so we have to implement new measures to get the job done. We handle facility assessments without inspections in many cases and developed tools that we continue to use. For example, we relied heavily on remote regulatory assessments as well as engagements with global regulators through mutual recognition agreements and confidentiality agreements. In 2022, OPQ staff conducted 75 pre-licensed facility inspections in 18 countries and 10 states, and used remote regulatory assessments to add on 85 regulatory submissions. Innovative quality assessments, coupled with the user fee programs, were integral in the approval of 914 generic drugs, including 86 complex generics, which increased competition in the market. These innovative approaches have helped us maintain on-time action of more than 90% overall for submissions with go dates. As part of assessment modernization effort, To help improve our assessment efficiency and knowledge management, we created CASA, which stands for Knowledge Aims Assessment and Structure Application. It is a database platform for structure, quality assessments and applications that support knowledge management. As applications arrive with new information, OPQ wants to be able to assess that information in conjunction with our existing knowledge on products, manufacturing processes, and facilities, as well as achieve knowledge management throughout the life cycle of the drug product we evaluate. Some key features of CASA worthwhile highlighting here are captures and manages knowledge across the product life cycle, has built-in rules, algorithms, and analyses to inform regulatory decision-making, focuses on structured regulatory quality assessments, and provides data integration with other FDA systems. Using CASA enables us to do our quality assessment more effectively and efficiently by applying the same quality standards and at the same time improve the consistencies of our quality assessment. We see the benefits of CASA in the assessment of generic solid oral dosage forms for which the interface has been live since February 2021. We hope to achieve the same successes with CASA for just substances that was recently released in March 2023 and is applicable to ANDAs, DMFs, and NDAs. Our vision over the next few years includes expanding CASAs to all generic dosage forms, INDs, new drugs, and biologic applications, as well as post-approval changes. Now, I would like to talk about an initiative I'm excited about related to Quality Management Maturity, or QMM. One can think of QMM as part of an array of quality. The FDA assesses drug product quality in applications, and we monitor pharmaceuticals in the US market to ensure that each dose is safe and effective and free of contamination and defects. This gives patients confidence in every dose they take. Process quality is controlling manufacturing risk to provide a quality drug product from the raw material to the packaged product. This is what gives manufacturers confidence in every batch they release to the market. The FDA assesses process quality in applications, and we monitor and inspect facilities manufacturing for the US market. Mature quality management uses performance and patient focus to identify areas of improvement and implement changes accordingly. To enable pragmatic, proactive regulation, we need leading indicators that are data that tell us about potential quality problems before they occur. This is where Quality Management Maturity, or QMM, enters the conversation. QMM is the state achieved when manufacturers have consistent, reliable, and robust business processes to achieve quality objectives and promote continued improvement. It is important to understand that quality management maturity is not just one thing. It is an umbrella concept, and many elements fall under it. For example, quality metrics are a key aspect of a mature pharmaceutical quality system. Data-driven approaches reduce quality issues and drive continued improvement. However, QMM is about much more than any one of these elements. QMM entered the discussion in full in a 2019 cross-government report on drug shortages, and one recommended solution from this report is to develop a rating system to incentivize drug manufacturers to invest in achieving QMM at their facilities. Since the publication of this report, there has been a building consensus regarding the importance of this QMM program. The conclusion of a 2020 CDER-sponsored workshop that include patients, healthcare providers, purchasers, pharmacies, and payers was that stakeholders largely agreed on the need to develop and implement quality ratings to allow for differentiation by an attributes other than price. In 2021, White House 100-day report charged FDA with leading the development of a framework to measure a facility's quality management maturity. Then early this year, the National Academies published a report with the recommendation to establish a quality rating system in collaboration with business partners and stakeholders. I view QMM ratings as a rare win-win-win situation, as nearly everyone benefits: patients, consumers, industries, and the FDA. They enable patients to have a more reliable access to drugs that are less prone to shortages and supply disruptions, providing them more confidence in their next dose. They enable industry to continually improve and reward so-called good actors in the markets through transparencies. They enable the FDA to deploy our surveillance and inspection tools more effectively. The FDA has formed a cross-functional team to facilitate the development of the QMM rating program. We will continue to engage with stakeholders as we build this innovative QMM program. As many of you are aware, advanced manufacturing is a key component of the overall U.S. strategy to strengthen pharmaceutical supply chains. The FDA has long supported investments in advanced manufacturing to provide a safe and more secure supply chain. Of course, advanced manufacturing is also not just one thing and can be novel dosage forms, new manufacturing technologies, and advanced analytical methods. I want to emphasize too that advanced manufacturing is not a futuristic approach. Advanced manufacturing is right now providing quality drugs to patients with cystic fibrosis, HIV, breast cancer, leukemia, and asthma. One example of our continued commitment to an advanced manufacturing technology is the Emerging Technology Program. This program was established at the end of 2014 to promote and facilitate the adoption of innovative approaches to pharmaceutical product design and manufacturing. The Emerging Technology Team, ETT, currently has around 30 members who represent Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, Office of Compliance, and Office of Regulatory Affairs. Additional ad hoc SME subject matter expert can join when specific knowledge is needed on a certain novel technology. Emerging Technology Program functions by engaging and collaborating with industry members as they develop novel technologies. Emerging Technology Team will discuss, identify, and resolve technical and regulatory issues as the technology is developed and adopted from early development stage to regulatory approval. It is critical that the regulatory framework for advanced manufacturing provides clarity and reduces uncertainty for products manufactured with advanced technologies. To address this need, we began the Framework for Advanced Manufacturing Evaluation, or FRAME initiative. We funded a series of workshops at the National Academies that resulted in their report on pharma manufacturing innovations in the pipeline. Their report indicates the emergence of integrated, flexible, and distributed manufacturing technologies that can even operate at the point of care. These distributed and point-of-care manufacturing technologies will challenge our current regulatory paradigm. As we are not the ones developing these technologies, engagement with stakeholders is a key component of the FRAME initiative. Last fall, CDER published a discussion paper getting public comments on the areas for consideration and policy development for distributed and point-of-care manufacturing. We also implemented a public workshop in partnership with the Product Quality Research Institute. Stakeholders interested in this technology were invited to attend this meeting. This workshop brought together leaders from regulatory agencies, industry, and academia to discuss critical topics related to these technologies. In March 2023, we released a discussion paper on the use of artificial intelligence in drug manufacturing and will seek similar stakeholder engagement. I would like to now address some current misunderstanding regarding advanced manufacturing. First, the use of advanced manufacturing is not mandated by FDA. The agency approves drugs if they comply with applicable standards, regulations, and laws. There can be benefits to advanced manufacturing such as increased reliability of drug supply. However, these benefits may be realized using advanced manufacturing in some but not all cases. I want to be clear that advanced manufacturing is not just for innovator companies. Multiple developers of generic drugs have engaged with CDER Emerging Technology Program on the use of advanced manufacturing technologies for generic drug products. Third, I want to be clear that generic drug companies are not required to implement advanced manufacturing simply because an innovator company has done so. If an innovator company implements advanced manufacturing, the standards for generic drug application assessment and approval would not change, in part because specification criteria are established based on relevance to the patient. There is no prescribed review timeline for advanced manufacturing applications other than those related to user fee goal days. A recent CDER self-audit indicates that advanced manufacturing applications have been approved on time even before the user fee timeline. In closing, although we have faced unprecedented challenges in an evolving world, innovations has allowed us to maintain, or dare I even say, advanced pharmaceutical quality. It seems to me that innovation has been the active ingredient in regulating pharmaceutical quality. It is what allows us to mitigate and prevent problematic quality issues. Let's continue working together to ensure patients have access to quality medicine. And with this, I would like to conclude my presentation and thank you for your attention.
Thank you for those great keynote office presentations. Now we'll be moving into our session presentations, and our first presentation is on Controlled Correspondence Program Updates under GDUFA III. Our first presenter is Lieutenant Commander Marcia Fields, who's a Controlled Correspondence Coordinator for the Office of Regulatory Operation in the immediate office in CDER. Prior to joining FDA, she was in FDA's Office of Regulatory Affairs, Office of Medical Products and Tobacco Operations, and the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality Operations as a pharma investigator. Our next presentation is on submitting a successful controlled correspondence for quality-related questions. Our presenter is Dr. Shanaz Reed, who's a policy lead in the Office of Policy for Pharmaceutical Quality and OPQ since 2015 and works on controlled correspondences, maps, and other policy documents. Since 2020, she's been a Controlled Correspondence Coordinator for OPQ. She joined OGD in 2003 as a CMC reviewer, reviewing ANDAs, DMFs, and supplements. Our third presentation in this session is an overview of the FDA product-specific Guidance, also known as PSGs, program under GDUFA III. Our presenter is Commander Christine Lay, who joined the Office of Research and Standards in OGD in January 2017 as Regulatory Officer and Program Manager. Throughout her work in ORS, Commander Lay has been instrumental in policy, process development, and implementation of the pre-ANDA program under GDUFA. As a program director since 2021, Commander Lay provides leadership, direction, and management in all facets of the FDA product-specific guidance program in accordance with strategic plans, mission, and the vision of OGD. Please join me to welcome our first presenter, Commander Fields.
Thank you to each keynote speaker for those opening remarks. I'm Lieutenant Commander Marcia Fields, and I'm so happy to join you during this session to provide you with tips related to submissions of controlled correspondence within the Generic Drug User Fee Amendment, also known as GDUFA. These enhancements are commitments for fiscal years 2023 to 2027. Today's presentation will cover 4 objectives. I want to talk with you about what qualifies as controlled correspondence, then present you with guidance of how they can be submitted correctly. I'd like to share a few common examples of controlled correspondence considerations during the submission. I will end with how you can use the tools from this presentation and other published resources to determine when you should follow up regarding your controlled correspondence and with whom. Now that we have a framework on which you can base your expectations for this half hour, let's pause for some interaction. I would like to know about you. I have 2 poll questions to gain an appreciation of your familiarity with the topic and its associated resources. Have you previously attended a small business and industry assistance conference that included information related to controlled correspondence? A, yes. B, no. I will pause to give you time to respond. Thank you for your response. Please keep this question in mind as reference when providing feedback on today's presentation. Your comments may determine if this material should be presented separately for groups who have no or little experience with application submission or groups that have experience with multiple previous controlled correspondence submissions. Poll question number 2. Are you aware there is a draft guidance for industry-controlled correspondence related to generic drug development published in December 2022? A, yes. B, no. Please take the time now to answer. So the guidance that you may or may not be aware of is currently open for public comment. Comments may be sent online or via postal mail. Getting back to the content. Controlled correspondence are inquiries related to drug development, but they're not generic like our office. Rather, they are specific and must be related to a new drug application to which your company is attempting to file a generic pathway. I may use the words inquiry, control, controls, controlled correspondence, or correspondence interchangeably. For those of you in the audience who are not new to the controlled correspondence submission process, I bring to your attention the reminder that correspondence that was known as standard is now known as level 1. What was previously deemed complex controlled correspondence is now known as level 2. For those of you who are new to this process, I will explain what level 1 and level 2 are on the next slides. Clarification of ambiguity are controlled correspondence in FDA's judgment where the responses or a critical portion of them merit further clarification. The complete definitions for the terms listed on the slide and more can be found in the GDUFA III commitment letter, which will be included in the resource section at the end. This slide describes when you can submit a control correspondence. You may submit inquiries related to a specific element of generic drug product development before the abbreviated new drug application, also known as ANDA submission. You may submit inquiries after a product-specific guidance or PSG teleconference if you seek further feedback from FDA. After issuance of a complete response letter or CRL or tentative approval, or after ANDA approval. In the event there are questions concerning post-approval requirements are not specific to an ANDA and that are not covered in its related guidance, the agency is committed to responding to at least 90% of Level 1 control correspondence within 60 days. Level 2 control correspondence meets the criteria of Level 1 control correspondence and additionally involves evaluation of clinical content, requests evaluations of alternative bioequivalent approaches, for example, pharmacokinetic, in vitro, or clinical. It may require input from another office or center, or requests a covered product authorization and review of bioequivalence protocols for development and testing that involves human clinical trials for an ANDA where the reference listed drug is subject to a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy with elements to assure safe use. Requests a covered product authorization to obtain sufficient quantities of an individual covered product subject to a REMS with a TOSU when development and testing does not involve clinical trials. The agency is committed to responding to 90% of Level 2 controls in 120 days. So you may be asking yourself, how do I know whether the agency considers my inquiry Level 1 or Level 2? We recommend you use the guidance to help you answer this question. Evaluate the content of your inquiry. In addition to using the guidance, you may email the Office of Generic Drugs at genericdrugs@fda.gov, fda.hhs.gov, after 60 days from the date of submission to request a status update. By the 60th day mark, you should have received a substantive answer, received a missed go date letter, or if you email a status request, you may be notified the inquiry is Level 2 and we're still working on the response. Clarifications of ambiguity are control correspondence in FDA's judgment where the responses or a critical portion of them merit further clarification. What that means is you may receive a response from the agency and you question the completeness or clarity of the answer. You may petition for clarification. You have 7 calendar days from when you receive the agency's substantive response to request a clarification. So let's recap our first few minutes. I've described what the agency considers control correspondence and how it's categorized. I've recommended that you frame your evaluations from this presentation to determine if this content will be more valuable if presented to groups separately, those who are new to the process versus those who are seasoned in the submission process and are only interested in updates, and alluded to an extremely useful resource section that will be shared with you in the end. I would like to take the time now to advise you we have published a video on FDA's YouTube channel related to control correspondence. The essence of that content was to highlight the changes between GDUFA II and GDUFA III. The intent of this presentation is not to repeat entirely the information found there. Please consider watching that video if you have not already and are interested in changes that took place on October 1st, 2022. The link for the video will be listed on the resources page towards the end of the presentation. Control correspondence are submitted through the CDER Direct NextGen collaboration portal to allow for more efficient processing of the control correspondence and to list the request history. Some of the references for the portal have been updated since the video on YouTube, and they will be listed in the resource section at the end as well. Of note, it is extremely important that when you access the CDER NextGen portal homepage, please select Controlled Correspondence to begin. Here I will describe what does not qualify as a controlled correspondence. If you send these types of questions through the portal, we will acknowledge your submission, but advise you it will not receive substantive review. These controls are considered not valid. Questions may be too general, or they may be too broad with respect to generic drug development. All of this information is specifically found in the guidance for controlled correspondence. Please reference it often. The documents should be submitted on your business letterhead. The cover letter containing the inquiry should be dated within 7 days of the FDA submission date. Please do not forward date documents. The name, title, street address, email address, phone number should all be included. Please do not list a post office box. If the email domain for the applicant or the U.S. agent do not match the company name, please explain the discrepancy. Foreign companies pursuing generic drug approval in the U.S. must have a U.S. agent. The letter of authorization validates and explains this relationship. Domestic companies may also assign a U.S. agent. U.S. agents for U.S.-based companies should identify the applicant in the control correspondence. All submissions must include the reference-listed drug serving as the basis of submission. Even inquiries related to approved ANDAs should include RLD information. Please keep in mind other things to include in your control correspondence. The previous related control that should be included are those that were accepted for substantive review. You will need to submit both the original correspondence and the agency's response. Please also include any information requests sent by the agency related to the previous related control correspondence and the response to the information request. Please keep in mind if you are submitting an inquiry related to a previous control correspondence, but you have not received a response, it is best practice to wait until you have received an agency response prior to asking the related question. If you have found research through literature reviews that would support justification for your inquiry, please include it. We ask for you to identify a review discipline because in the event there are multiple questions in one submission, they should all fall under one specific review division. If there are requests for information related to more than one review discipline, these questions should be submitted separately. Lastly, please be direct and succinct in the question or questions you are submitting. And include that the controlled correspondence is related to a potential or actual ANDA submission. Inactive ingredient evaluation is a common controlled correspondence submission. Please do not request evaluation of inactive ingredients that do not exceed the levels in the inactive ingredient database for the same route of administration. A total of 3 proposals may be submitted per the inactive ingredient control. This may look like 3 different inactive ingredients with 1 proposed amount, or it may represent 1 inactive ingredient with 3 proposed amounts. Continuing with best practices for inactive ingredient controls, if a requester submits a range of levels for the inactive ingredient, the agency will review the highest proposed level in that range. Please do not submit the entire formulation. Submit only the inactive ingredients in question to be evaluated. Please do not include pharmacology toxicology data for review in support of an inactive ingredient evaluation request. The Office of Generic Drugs will not pre-review that data. For products with multiple routes of administration, the request for each route of administration should be submitted separately. Determination of qualitative and quantitative sameness is another common control. If a product is available in multiple strengths, the control correspondence to evaluate Q1, Q2 should have a maximum of 1 strength per control correspondence. Different fill volumes are considered different strengths. For example, a Q1, Q2 evaluation of a 5 milliliter, 10 milliliter, and 20 milliliter fill volume in one control correspondence would not be considered valid. The applicant would be directed to submit 3 separate requests. For the formulation review, the maximum is 3 proposed compositions. The inactive ingredient quantities of the outlined composition should not be in ranges. The formulation description should include adequate details, including salt and hydration forms, purity, grade or type, function, and appropriate units. FDA will respond to control correspondence seeking regulatory and/or scientific advice after issuance of a complete response letter for an ANDA or supplement issued after October 1st, 2022. Please include a reference to the specific deficiency in the complete response letter related to the control correspondence. You should not submit proposed responses to the deficiencies identified in the complete response letter for FDA to review in a controlled correspondence. Inquiries related to a pending ANDA should be submitted to the ANDA as general correspondence. However, there are exceptions, and these include inquiries regarding the development of a new strength or package configuration, new in GDUFA III inquiries for regulatory and/or scientific advice for addressing deficiencies in a complete response letter. Please be sure to include the complete response letter and reference the specific deficiency. Also new in GDUFA III, an applicant can submit a control correspondence seeking further feedback after a product-specific guidance teleconference. Control correspondence may be submitted during ANDA assessment cycle seeking a covered product authorization. Upon receipt of a control correspondence, FDA will send one of 2 responses within 7 calendar days to the portal account, either an acknowledgement PDF confirming the inquiry is a valid control correspondence with an assigned tracking number or, control correspondence number. It would also include the receipt date, the FDA receipt date, or that acknowledgement will be notification that the inquiry is not a control correspondence or lacks sufficient information. If you do not receive the acknowledgement PDF in your portal account or the notification that it was declined to be received for substantive review, within 7 days of submission, please email the Office of Generic Drug mailbox to ensure that we received your control correspondence. When the review is complete, FDA will send a substantive response to the inquiry to the requester's portal account. If we fail to meet the goal date, we also send notification of the missed goal date. Remember, the commitment letter identifies a goal of 90% of level 1 controls receiving a response within 60 days and level 2 controls within 120 days. The guidance related to control correspondence states that FDA will not respond to status requests regarding pending control correspondence before the goal date. You may be asking yourself, how do I know the goal date? I will refer you back to two references, both the guidance for controlled correspondence and the commitment letter that characterizes level 1 and level 2 correspondence, and the corresponding goal dates. If 60 days has passed and you have not received a substantive response for what you considered a level 1, you may email the Office of Generic Drug mailbox for a status request. The control may have been upgraded to level 2, and the review is still underway. In summary, if you do not receive the initial acknowledgement PDF in your portal account, or the notification that it was declined to be received for substantive review response within 7 days, or if after 60 days from the submission date and you did receive the initial acknowledgement, but you have not yet received the substantive response, you may email the Office of Generic Drugs mailbox. A few helpful tips related to submissions. Please do include the reference listed drug information in your cover letter and enter the reference listed drug in the portal, even if the reference listed drug is discontinued. Please do request the status of your controlled correspondence after 60 days have elapsed from the date of submission if you've not yet received a substantive response from the agency. Please do not submit a controlled correspondence for a bioequivalence waiver request. The Office of Generic Drugs will not pre-review waiver requests. You should not submit the same inquiry in a controlled correspondence and in a meeting request. For your reference, the document hyperlinked on this slide may serve as guidance for submitting a meeting versus submitting a controlled correspondence. Tips related to clarification of ambiguity. Please do include a letter of authorization with a request to clarify ambiguities in the agency's response to a controlled correspondence if the clarification of ambiguity is being submitted by an agent on behalf of an applicant or potential applicant. Requests to clarify ambiguities in FDA's controlled correspondence should be submitted within 7 calendar days of the agency's response. Please note, FDA does not intend to provide clarification on why a formulation is not Q1, Q2 to the reference listed drug in a request to clarify ambiguities. Related to submissions, any inquiry sent to the Office of Generic Drug mailbox or portal on behalf of a foreign firm should be submitted through their U.S. agent. Be sure to create the CDER Nexus portal account using corporate emails, and please ensure the information in the submitted documents regarding the company and the reference listed drug are consistent with what is entered into the portal. Please do include the ANDA number in the cover letter for any questions related to a pending or approved ANDA. And be sure to accurately reflect the status of the ANDA, whether it's complete response, pending, pre-assignment, etc. A new control number will be issued for every control. More tips. Please do not include previous controlled correspondence that were not accepted for substantive review in response with a subsequent submission. Please do not forward date documents. For example, if you're submitting your control on the 1st of the month, please don't date your documents for the 2nd or the 3rd or the 4th of the month. Please be sure to date all documents and submit your control correspondence within 7 days of the date of your cover letter. The letter of authorization should be reviewed and updated annually. Challenge question number 1. How long should you wait to receive acknowledgement that the control correspondence was accepted or not? A, 30 days, B, 7 days, C, 60 days, D, 120 days. I will pause to give you time to respond. Thank you for your response. The correct answer is B, 7 days. Challenge question number 2. After what time period may you request a status if you have not yet received a substantial response or review from the agency? A, 7 days, B, 21 days, C, 30 days, D, 60 days. I'll pause to give you time to respond. Thank you for your response. The correct answer is 60 days. Here are points of context for you to direct your questions. We have the Small Business and Industry Assistance website. We also have support for if you have questions with anything related to your portal account. For example, you're not able to open documents, you're not, the documents that you are able to open, you are not able to read. Our Office of Generic Drug mailbox is also here for your reference, and the filing status. Here are the two resources that I mentioned earlier, both the draft guidance that is open for public comment, as well as the commitment letter that has the definitions and much of the content that is in this presentation. Our more broader information found on the FDA website as it relates to the Office of Generic Drugs and the presentation that was recorded that compared GDUFA II to GDUFA III on the FDA YouTube website. If you're a first-time user, here are informations for establishing your portal account. It includes frequently asked questions. So I would like to end with a summary of the things that we've talked about, which is talked about the definitions and characterizations of controlled correspondence, things that are not considered controlled correspondence, some examples of types of controlled correspondence and tips for submitting those common types of controlled correspondence, and then keeping in mind things that may make those common controlled correspondence not valid. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. Stay tuned for the Q&A session that will be later in the hour.
Good morning. My name is Shanaz Reed, and I'm the Controlled Correspondence Coordinator for OPQ. I will be speaking today on how to submit a successful controlled correspondence for quality-related questions. The learning objectives is to describe the different types of controlled correspondences that are reviewed in OPQ. I will also try to provide some helpful information for submitting quality-related controlled correspondences. According to GDUFA III, there are two levels of controlled correspondences. Level 1 has GDUFA due date of 60 days, and most controlled correspondences fall in this category. Level 2 is controlled correspondences which have a GDUFA due date of 120 days, and those OPQ controlled correspondences which require a consult from another center, office, or sub-office fall into this category. In OPQ, we have different sub-disciplines. The first one is drug product quality, which includes questions on formulation, specifications, testing, stability, and comprises the bulk of our controlled correspondences. And this is reviewed in the Office of Lifecycle Drug Products. Drug substance questions are reviewed by the Division of Lifecycle Active Pharmaceutical Ingredient in the Office of New Drug Products. Questions on dissolution, in vivo, in vitro correlations are considered as biopharmaceutics questions. and these are reviewed by the Office of New Drug Products Division of Biopharmaceutics. The next subdiscipline is microbiology, which includes all sterile manufacture and bacterial endotoxin specifications and questions about that, which is reviewed by the Division of Microbiology Assessment in the Office of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Assessment. And the next subdiscipline is process and facilities, which is questions about manufacturing process, batch size, in-process controls, and is reviewed by the Division of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing in the Office of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Assessment. Here are some submission considerations. For pre-submission and post-approval controlled correspondences, we request that questions should be submitted separately for each OPQ subdiscipline wherever possible, and that is drug substance questions should be in one controlled correspondence, the solution in a separate controlled correspondence, and so on. However, for post-complete response letter controlled correspondence, we would prefer that all quality-related questions be submitted in a single controlled correspondence, and that will enable us to provide a holistic response based on all the information. However, please do not use the controlled correspondence to ask us to preview the response for the CRL. Also, all quality-related questions should be in separate controlled correspondences from non-quality related questions. So separate questions out that require review by more than one discipline. For example, in post-approval controlled correspondences, quality questions on batch size, amount of stability data, etc. should be separated from questions on in vivo testing wherever possible. So a successful controlled correspondence submission will contain a concise and complete question or questions with appropriate supporting information, resolve all Q1, Q2 formulation issues before submitting the quality questions, verify that the new guidance has not been published on the same topic, and refer to FDA's guidance for industry, questions and answers on quality-related control correspondence to find out if the question and answer is already posted there. Some issues that we have seen with quality-related control correspondences are not enough background information. For example, not including the proposed commercial batch size for questions about exhibit batch size, not clarifying if a common blend is used for questions on bracketing, and not providing necessary product information that would be needed to answer the question. For example, if the product is Q1, Q2 with the RLD. On the other hand, there can be too much information. Lengthy and detailed information is not needed. The emphasis of the control correspondence should be on key information only and not extraneous data that does not support the request. Also, complete study reports are generally not appropriate for a CC. These will be reviewed in the ANDA after submission. A summary of the data should be submitted. Another issue is that sometimes it's not clear what the question is that is being asked. The question may be phrased so it's difficult to understand, or there may be no specific question included. So I would recommend that a question or questions are included and they be specific and easy to understand. And the control correspondence can also be too general. For example, for post-approval changes in facility, which is not related to specific ANDA, the control correspondence may not provide the dosage form, which makes it difficult to respond to what is required, since different dosage forms have different requirements. These are some examples of quality-related control correspondences. The first is change in container closure system. This can be from ampule to vial or vial to ampule, maybe a different size container from the RLD or a different composition of the container. In general, container closure changes are acceptable, but justification and supporting data should be provided to justify why the change is needed and whether it will be equivalent. The number of exhibit batches to be packaged. This is a question that we frequently get. One exhibit batch should be completely packaged in the marketing presentation, and the other two batches can be partially packaged in sufficient quantities to comply with the CFR. And this is also noted in the FDA guidance for industry, ANDA stability testing of drug substances and products questions and answers. Another example of quality-related control correspondences is device questions. The device questions on specifications, performance data, manufacturing quality information should be submitted to OPQ. However, questions on differences between the user interface of the proposed generic drug device combination and the RLD should be submitted to OGD's Office of Research and Standards. We also get questions on what should be used when the reference listed drug and or the reference standard has been discontinued. In most cases, when the RLD is discontinued, the reference standard can be used for physical-chemical comparison studies. However, if the RLD and the RS are both discontinued, then a control correspondence should be submitted to Orange Book in OGD to assign a new reference standard which should be used for the physical-chemical comparison. Approved ANDA from the market should not be randomly selected for this comparison unless it is designated as a reference standard. Also, there are specific questions that we may not be able to answer in a control correspondence. These include acceptability of a certain specification or an in-process control, and also acceptability of an overage in the drug product. In these cases, we will provide general guidance, but we may not be able to respond to specific limits and overage amounts. We will assess these after submission during the ANDA review based on all of the information that is in the application. Now, clarification of ambiguities in the control correspondence response can be submitted within 7 days after the response is sent out. No new questions or rephrasing of questions should be in the submission, and no new information should be included. OPQ receives inquiries that are submitted to the OPQ's mailbox or other agency mailboxes, and some of these inquiries may be eligible to be submitted as controlled correspondences. In these cases, FDA will notify the inquirer and request that the question should be submitted as a controlled correspondence. So in general, FDA will apply all available guidances to each situation, and it is best to do the same and provide a sufficient scientific justification if a variance from the guidance is being requested. And reliance on historic trends may seem to be a sound approach for justification. However, if the regulatory science has moved beyond the understanding of that subject at that particular time, the significance of the earlier outcomes will be diminished. Now for the challenge questions. The first challenge question is, separate controlled correspondences should be submitted for different OPQ subdisciplines for A. Pre-submission questions, B. Post-approval questions, C. Post-CRL questions, D. A and B. And the correct answer is D, A and B. For pre-submission questions and for post-approval questions, separate control correspondences should be submitted for different OPQ subdisciplines. Challenge question number 2. Which of the following statements is true? If the RLD or RS is discontinued, another approved ANDA can be used for comparison. Or B, a follow-up question can be asked in request for clarification of ambiguity. Or C, a concise question and appropriate amount of information should be provided in the control correspondence. And the correct answer is C. A concise question and appropriate amount of information should be provided in the controlled correspondence. So, in summary, please provide appropriate information and clear and concise questions in the controlled correspondence. Please submit separate control correspondences for different OPQ subdisciplines, except for post-CRL controls, and for OPQ and OGD. Clarification of ambiguity in response should be submitted in 7 days and should not contain any new information. Here are some resources. The first is the controlled correspondence guidance that was published in December 22. The second is the guidance for industry, questions and answers on quality-related control correspondence. And the third is the web page for the questions and answers on quality-related control correspondence. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. And please save your questions for the panel discussion at the end of the session.
Thank you for the introduction and hello to all joining us today. I'm Commander Christine Lay, Program Director of Product Specific Guidance or PhD program in the Office of Research and Standards within the Office of Generic Drugs. I will be presenting an overview of the FDA PhD program under GDUFA III. The Office of Research and Standards lead the FDA PhD program in collaboration with multiple disciplines and offices within the FDA. Outline for today's presentation will be an overview on general principles and a background of the FDA PhDs. Discuss the PhD process and communications to facilitate generic drug development. Describe the FDA PhD database and provide updated information related to the PhD program under GDUFA III. Lastly, outline of the new meetings related to PhD, such as PhD teleconference and PhD meetings that are new under GDUFA III. What is a product-specific guidance or PhDs? PhD reflects the FDA current thinking and expectations on how to develop generic drug products therapeutically equivalent to specific reference listed drug products or RLD. PhDs contain recommendations on individual drug products by identifying the methodology and approaches for developing generic drugs and generating evidence recommended to support under approval. Recommendations in PhD are supported by key science and research outcomes. PhDs are unique to the generic drug development programs. PhD is an integral part of the FDA ANDA programs. As shown in this diagram, outcomes from GDUFA-funded research provide support to develop and improve our standards and guidance, thus expediting the assessment and approval of ANDAs. In 2007, GDUFA II introduced the pre-ANDA program with a specific focus to have an enhanced mechanism to assist generic drug applicant and or industry through science and research, pre-ANDA meetings for complex products, PhD development, and control correspondences. The pre-ANDA program continues under GDUFA III with new elements and commitments will be highlighted later in my presentation, with a focus on those related to the PhD programs. Background on PhDs and what is involved. To start, refer to the FDA regulation Title 21 Code of Federal Regulations or 21 CFR Part 320 on definitions and requirements for bioavailability and bioequivalent studies. You can also refer to the general FDA guidance for industry. PhDs provide product-specific recommendations for developing generic drugs and generating the evidence needed to support ANDA approval. One important note here, PhDs are specifically for generic drug development, although other types of applications such as 505(b)(2) may use bioequivalent or be principle as laid out in the PhDs. Started in 2007, FDA began publishing the PhDs. As of April this year, more than 2,000 PhDs have been issued and are included in the PhD database on its website. In addition, several pertinent updates related to GDUFA III implementation have gone live, and I will discuss these changes later. This diagram illustrates number of PhDs the FDA has issued from the inaugural GDUFA I in fiscal year 2013 to GDUFA II in fiscal year 2022. In FY 2022, the FDA issues 110 new PhDs and 67 revised PhDs. In the past 10 years, a grand total of 1,870 new revised and final PhDs were issued, and 40% of that total were complex products. Complex generics are products that have complex active ingredient formulation, dosage form, route of administration, or complex drug device combinations products. PhD for complex products are typically difficult to develop and may require novel approaches for BE assessment, and many are supported by GDUFA-funded research. GDUFA III began on October 1, 2022. For newly approved non-complex NCE new drug applications, the FDA commits to issuing at least 90% of the PHEs for these products within 2 years after the date of approval, no change as compared to GDUFA II. Under GDUFA III, new goals for newly approved complex new drug applications on or after October 1st of 2022. A PHE will be issued for 50% within 2 years and 75% within 3 years after the date of approval. The FDA will continue to develop these complex products approved prior to October 1, 2022, for which none have been published. This graph illustrates the PHE process as a continuous cycle. New PHEs are prioritized for development or revision, followed by PHE development includes technical assessment of the regulatory history or other related safety concerns. Next, draft PHE is published and posted in a quarterly batch or as a standalone. After publication is followed by a period of public comments. The Federal Register notice will identify a comment period typically 60 days after the notice is posted. The FDA always consider all comments made to the docket before we finalize the PHE. Multiple factors are taken into consideration when prioritizing PHE development. I mentioned previously, beginning with GDUFA III, the FDA committed to developing PHEs for both non-complex NCE NDAs and complex NDAs. Other external interests, such as pre-ANDA meeting for complex product, control correspondence, or public requests for product without PHEs. Responses to public health priorities, drug availability and accessibility, in addition to the outcome of GDUFA-funded research. Under GDUFA III, the FDA is committed to seeking public input on prioritization of PHEs during the public research and scientific meeting annually. Public requests are one of the factors considered for PHE prioritizations. The FDA receives approximately 100 requests annually. Requests can be submitted via the CDER NextGen portal or the portal. The FDA validates, reviews these requests, and takes into consideration during prioritization and development process. How we write PHE are planned. Identification of needs listed on the left where a PHE revision may be warranted. The FDA prioritizes and revises PHEs as necessary based on the reference listed drugs or IRD changes. For example, newly added strain, newly identified safety concerns, responses to public comments, and knowledge acquired from ANDA assessment, pre-ANDA meetings, or control correspondences. In GDUFA III, there are 5 revision categories as illustrated on the right, with their individual description. A critical revision is applicable to all ANDAs, including approved, because the revision is necessary to ensure the ANDA has the same safety and efficacy as the IRD. In vivo and in vitro major revisions are additional BE study or evidence that are necessary to establish BE and support ANDA approval. Major revisions may impact unapproved ANDAs. Under GDUFA III, applicants may use the new meeting, such as PHE teleconference and PHE meeting process to get FDA feedback, which I will address this meeting later. A minor revision is any revision that is not considered major. And editorial revision is primarily administrative, grammar, spelling, etc. The revision of a PHE may contain more than one category, and the FDA provide advance notice of upcoming new and revised PHE for complex and non-complex products, which will be covered next. When are PHE published? New and revised PHEs are generally published quarterly in batches. On occasion, a PHE may be published individually as a standalone, for example, to meet the GDUFA goal day or to coordinate with a relevant citizen petition. The published PHE are announced in the Federal Register and made available to the public on the FDA website. This is a screenshot of FDA PHE public database. PHE for specific products are arranged in alphabetical order by the active ingredient. Users can browse using the first letter from the list here, or search by the active ingredient, RLD or RS numbers. On the lower left are links for newly added and revised PHE, last posted in February this year. In order to locate a PHE, users can filter search results or sort by the columns. From the sortable list, you can click on the hyperlink of the active ingredient to open the PHE page, as seen here on the right, which show an example of a PHE page in PDF format. The layout and content format of the PHE page are tailored based on a specific drug product. How to use RLD/RS on the PHE webpage. In the blue box are the RLD/RS numbers. You can click on the hyperlink and it will take you to the Orange Book webpage. Keep in mind, the RLD/RS information for a specific PHE can only be found on the PHE webpage here, and not on the PHE page or the PDF file itself. Also, the day recommended column on the far right has been updated to reflect the posting date. RLD and RS information on the PHE webpage is used to identify a product related to a specific PHE, but should not be a substitution for the Orange Book. A PHE may cover multiple RLDs, and the applicant should use the Orange Book for correct basics of ANDA submission and identify RLD appropriately. The information is considered correct on the PHE webpage when the PHE is posted. However, the RS may change later, and the applicant should use the Orange Book to verify. For example, it is usually the RLD, but it may be different if the original RLD is no longer marketed. Webpage title Upcoming PHE for Generic Drug Product Development, also called the forecast list. To enhance transparency, under GDUFA III, the webpage has been updated to highlight the following. The FDA plans for issuing new and revised PHEs for both complex and non-complex products in the next 12 months, projected in months, years, or descriptive timeline. The FDA also updated the revision classification for each category to include detailed description. Keep in mind, the projected date of PHE publication may be subject to change. When the FDA becomes aware it will not meet the issuing date, we will update with a new projected issuing date on the website during the next scheduled update, typically when a new PHE patch is posted. Here are examples of planned new and revised PHE forecast lists on the webpage, last updated in February this year. Under GDUFA III, the FDA has updated the columns for complexity and planned publication date of months and years, or description timeline. On the right side, in the planned revised PHE list, each specific generic drug product includes the revision categories of major, minor, or editorial, and a brief description of the reason for revision. Refer to slide number 12 for the revision categories. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, the new and revised draft PHEs are published quarterly. The FDA issued a Federal Register notice via docket FDA-2007-D-0369 for public comments through a period of 60 days from posting. Upon receipt of the comments, the FDA will review and decide if there's a need for a PhD revision or the PhD revision is warranted. All comments to the docket are considered before FDA finalizes the PhD. PhD are occasionally withdrawn from the public webpage. This occurs when recommendations in a PhD no longer reflect the FDA current thinking. The withdrawal list can be accessed via the link and showed here with the last updated in May 2022. Under GDUFA III, 3 new meetings are added throughout the ANDA cycle, include pre- and post-ANDA submission PhD teleconference, pre-submission PhD meeting, and post-submission PhD meetings. Keep in mind, PhD teleconference can occur at any phases of pre-ANDA submission, during ANDA review, or post-action. Applicant or prospective applicant may request a PhD teleconference if they have already commenced an in vivo BE study to obtain agency feedback on potential impact on the new or revised PhD on the applicant development programs. To see another view for PhD teleconference, also called PhD TCON and PhD meetings. At the start of the event after PhD publication, an applicant has already commenced or completed in vivo BE study. They can request a PhD TCON within 60 days after the PhD publication. PhD TCON is used to triage the request and determine whether a PhD meeting is warranted. During a PhD TCON, the FDA will provide feedback on the potential impact of the recommendation in the PhD, but no scientific discussion. Pre-submission or post-submission PhD meeting may be requested, follow feedback received at the PhD TCON if additional scientific discussion on approaches different from PhD is needed. Alternatively, applicant may follow with a control correspondence to seek additional clarification. On February 17 this year, FDA issued a new draft guidance titled Product-Specific Guidance Meetings between FDA and ANDA applicant under GDUFA, where you can find more information. As described in the GDUFA III commitment letter, and to reiterate from previous slides, this table covers 3 meetings with format, requirement, and timeline for each meeting. For your awareness and detailed information of the PhD TCON and PhD meetings, the FDA invites you to join our upcoming SBIA webinar on May 15 this year, covering a deep dive GDUFA III scientific meetings. To meet the CE requirement, I have 2 questions. Question number 1, what is not one of the factors FDA takes into consideration while prioritizing PhD development or revision? A, ANDA assessment goal days. B, public health priorities. C, public requests. D, drug availability and accessibility. The answer is A. And the assessment goal date is not one of the factors FDA take into consideration while prioritizing PhD development or revision. Question number 2. The generic applicant or prospective applicant may request a PhD teleconference, also called PhD TCON, to obtain FDA feedback on the potential impact of the new or revised PhD on its development program. A, has already commenced in vivo bioequivalence study. B, has already commenced in vitro bioequivalence study. C, both A and B. The correct answer is A, only if has already commenced in vivo bioequivalence study. This concludes my presentation. The following 2 pages and links are useful resources I have mentioned throughout my presentation. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues here who have assisted with my development of this presentation. I really appreciate the insight and support all of you have provided. Thank you again, everyone, for your time and attention. I will be back later for the Q&A panel section.
Thank you to all of our presenters for excellent presentations. We'll now move into our first Q&A session. As a reminder, if you haven't had a chance to submit your questions in the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Please also indicate with your question at the beginning of the question the person to whom your question is being addressed. We do have a few additional panelists that will be joining us right now. First, we welcome Commander Malik Imam, who's an expert in labeling review of generic applications and has represented OGD on drug nomenclature standards, generic drug user fee implementations, and dispute resolutions. Currently, he is the Deputy Director for the Office of Regulatory Operations within OGD. Our next panelist, Dr. Manina Singh, is a Deputy Director in the Division of Bioequivalence Process Management and the Office of Bioequivalence in OGD. In her current role, she leads a division of regulatory health project managers and collaborates across CDER offices to optimize, plan, manage, organize, and direct the bioequivalence review processes for ANDAs and other submissions to ensure meeting and exceeding all regulatory commitments. Our third panelist is Dr. Peter Capella, who has nearly 15 years of FDA experience supporting generic drug quality reviews across a wide range of therapeutic areas. His group directly supported PEPFAR ANDA quality assessments for both pre and post-marketing. Next, we welcome Dr. Xiaoming Zhu, who's the Director of the Division of Product Quality Research in the Office of Testing and Research in FDA, where he leads multiple regulatory research areas such as complex formulations, nanomaterials, and advanced manufacturing. Dr. Zhu is a member of the FDA Nanotechnology Task Force, responsible for developing international collaborative programs and standards in the areas related to nanotechnology. It's also our pleasure to welcome Dr. Lei Zhang, the Deputy Director of ORS within OGD. ORS supplements the Generic Drug User Fee Amendments, or GDUFA, science and research commitments to ensure the therapeutic equivalence of generic drug products. Dr. Zhang is an accomplished professional with more than 23 years of combined experience in the areas of drug research, development, and regulatory review and approval. She's rapporteur for the ICH M13 Expert Working Group that is developing an M13 guideline to harmonize bioequivalence study design for immediate release oral dosage form drugs. Finally, we welcome Dave Coppersmith, a regulatory counsel in the Division of Policy Development, Office of Generic Drug Policy in OGD. Before joining OGD in May 2019, he was a supervisory regulatory counsel in the Center for Tobacco Products, Office of Compliance and Enforcement. Looks like we have some questions coming in right now, and the first two questions will be addressed to Shanaz Reed, and here is the first question. How many questions can be used for post-CRL controlled correspondence? For an example, a CRL contains 20 quality questions for product 1, and the applicant wants to ask questions on 3 quality questions. Is that acceptable? And what is the maximum number of CRL questions included for clarity in a controlled correspondence?
Yes, thank you for that question.
So while there is no maximum number of questions that can be submitted in a post-CRL quality control correspondence, we would request that a reasonable number of questions are submitted. And yes, 3 questions would be acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Shanaz Reed, and here is the question. What data is required for justification in change of container closure, and what stability data is required?
So for the controlled correspondence, you should submit a comparison of the RLD's container closure and the proposed container closure for your product, along with a rationale for the change. Stability data, in addition to information as per the packaging guidance, should be provided in the ANDA.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to a next panelist, we do have a couple questions that came in for Commander Malik Imam, and here is the first question. Does the agency determine the function of excipients in the Q1, Q2 controlled correspondence?
Thank you for that question. So the agency does not determine the function. You will need to provide the function with your table of composition of your ingredients. If you do not provide it, the control correspondence submitted will not be reviewed for substantive review. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question, Commander. We have one more question for you, and here is the question. And this is a question regarding inactive ingredient controlled correspondences. If a company has submitted a controlled correspondence for evaluation on the amount of one active ingredient and the controlled correspondence is still pending review, can a company submit a second controlled correspondence for a different inactive ingredient evaluation?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Captain Ford. Yes, absolutely. They can submit a second control requesting, whatever they feel like at that point. They can have concurrently up to 3 pending controls at the same time.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we've got a couple questions that came in for Commander Christine Lay. And here is the first question for Commander Lay. What are the triggers to develop a PSG for a specific DP? Is it its complexity?
Drug products. Thank you for the question. So the question is, what trigger to develop a PhD for a specific drug product, like complexity. So our goal is to develop the PhD for every product that approved. You can refer to slide number 10 for the prioritization to develop the PhD, or also slide number 12, like how the revised PhD are plated. So, however, the FDA cannot develop all the PhD at the same time. We need to prioritize them first. And also, we will base on the goal date, for example, the NCE for the non-complex, and also the newly approved complex products. If the product do not belong to any of these categories, then we do our best to develop as soon as feasible. Scientific research also may be determined if we can develop the PhD. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have one more question for you, Commander Lay, and here is the question. Are PSGs or guidances documents legally binding?
Thank you for the question. The FDA guidance describes the agency current thinking on the evidence needed to demonstrate that generic is equivalent to the corresponding reference list or the complex regulatory issue. So the PG is not legally binding to the public or the FDA. So refer to the statute or the regulation which is legally binding. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we have a couple questions that came in, at least one question for Dr. Manina Singh. And here's the first question for Manina Singh. What are the common new types of G3 post-submission controlled correspondences that the Office of Bioequivalence may review? And are you able to provide a few examples of the types of inquiries that your office reviews?
Thank you for the question. A common new types of post-submission controls that our office may review are those that are submitted after an issuance of a complete response letter or tentative approval. We also review controls related to approved ANDAs. To provide you a few examples on the types of inquiries that our Discipline Office of Bioequivalence may review include specific questions that are related to planning of bioequivalence studies, of generic drug product development, questions related to maximum daily exposure of an inactive ingredient, addition of additional strength to an approved product line, and request feedback on whether to conduct the recommended studies in the PSG for the additional strength, and BE studies for post-approval changes. You may also consult the control correspondence guidance for more information on the types of inquiries that our office reviews. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we do have a couple of questions that came in for Dr. Peter Capella. And here is the first question. Which subdivision of OPQ is responding to controlled correspondences related to nitrosamine impurities or quality?
Good morning. That's a very good question. And it relates to the difference between complexity in terms of controls. For instance, nitrosamine impurities, there can be questions about methodology, which would clearly come into a quality perspective. However, if the questions are surrounded by, are related to the limits or acceptable limits of the given impurity, that typically would require a consult with DPTR, Division of Pharmacology, Toxicology review. So in that case, if you're requesting that type of analysis on limits, you would definitely go directly pointing towards DPTR. If it comes in to our OLDP, we would immediately redirect and send it into DPTR for that analysis. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question, Dr. Capella. And I think there was another question that's slightly before this one that may have been good to have prior to answering it, but we'll ask it for you anyway. What is the difference between level 1 and 2 controlled correspondences?
Yeah, that's fine. What I just mentioned about the nitrosamine situation is a good example of this, whereas again, if it's a straightforward methodology question, that would certainly typically fall within the purview of level 1, fairly straightforward question or questions related to the methodology. However, if it is indeed related to limits requested or asked for by the applicant, the correspondent, that would rise to a level 2 due to the complexity of the pharm tox evaluation. So it's a good example of a difference between level 1 control and level 2. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we've got a couple of questions that came in for Dr. Xiaoming Zhu. And here is the first question for Dr. Zhu. Is it possible to apply a PSG's methodologies to a product containing the same active ingredient in a different strength if no PSG exists for the alternate strength product?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The short answer to that is it depends, but in general, I want to kind of highlighting or recognize that the PSGs are recommendations that are developed based on best available information. So because of the product complexity can vary for non-complex to complex products, that oftentimes the approaches to assess or develop and assess may be different. So, but in general, the approach is that if you think it's applicable and reasonable scientifically, you think can be justified, that can certainly be considered. And in terms of interaction, I think the controlled correspondence or even the pre-ENDA program can be good approaches to engage or inquire with FDA's input. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have one more question for Dr. Zhu, and here is the question. How would FDA prioritize research and decide which complex products to develop a PSG for?
Yeah, thanks again. I want to point to Christine's earlier presentation about the general approach on or consideration in prioritization of the development of the PSG. However, we do recognize there are some unique challenges associated with the complex products. Oftentimes, especially if there is no clear precedence from prior examples, in those cases, research might need to be conducted both internally and externally through extramural grants. And also in terms of prioritization of the research, GDUFA public workshop, which I think coming up very soon next month, is a really good place to provide input to the FDA and also help prioritizing the research priorities. So, but in general, the goal of the research is to really provide the understanding so that we can generate the best evidence, scientific evidence to help us develop PSG. But the timeline may vary. So exactly when the PSG may become available, it depends really on when the information may be available. So thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got about a little over a minute left. We're going to try to squeeze in our last two panelists. And here's the next question for Dr. Lei Zhang. Based on adoption of the M13 guidance, would FDA be open in revising all PSGs, asking for only fasting studies for immediate release non-complex products?
Thank you for the question. This is a very good question and very timely. As people are aware, we just published the ICH M13A draft guidance. So the short answer is yes, FDA will be open to revising the PSG if there's a change in the general guidance, change of the thinking in the general guidance. However, I also want to point out ICH M13A is still a draft and currently under public consultation. So it will be not ready for adoption or implementation immediately. And the FDA and also ICH M13 expert working group will consider the comments received on the draft guidance before they begin to work on the final version of the guidance. And I also would like to bring to the attention to this audience that FDA will hold a SBIA webinar on May 2nd to discuss further on the ICH M13A please tune into that webinar if you have more questions regarding M13A and also the PSGs. And as I mentioned, FDA is part of the M13 and ICH, and we will support the harmonized approach when it's time for implementation. And also in that webinar, FDA will provide some additional thinking or clarification on the FDA planning on the implementation of the M13A for generic drug applications. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got time, well, a little over time. We're going to try to squeeze in one more question, bring in our last panelist, Dave Coppersmith. And here is the question. If an ANDA has a BE study conducted before a PSG is issued, what should the sponsor do to be able to submit this to FDA?
Thank you for the question. So if there's no published PSG for a drug product and you have questions about your bioequivalent study, you can contact FDA through the appropriate pathway, either controlled correspondence or a pre-ANDA meeting to discuss the recommended approaches to establish bioequivalence. If FDA publishes a new PSG or also a revised PSG and you have questions about the impact that the recommendations in that PSG have on your development program, in certain situations, as stated in the GDUFA III commitment letter and also the guidance for industry PSG meetings between ANDA applicants and FDA, you may be able to request a PSG teleconference to discuss with FDA. I mean, you can refer to that guidance for more information on requesting a PSG teleconference. You can also refer to the guidance for industry ANDA submissions, refuse to receive standards, which discusses adequate justification for an approach that deviates from the published PSG. Thank you.
That's all the time we have to answer questions in this session. A huge thank you to our presenters and panelists for the great presentations and answers.